Troubled Fort Lauderdale millionaire Guma Aguiar raced his motorboat across the choppy waves of Port Everglades the day he vanished, leaving behind an overwhelming tangle of business and personal lawsuits, a family in turmoil, and questions about his survival. Today, I'm going to tell you about the mystery of missing Fort Lauderdale millionaire Guma Aguiar. This is waterfrontgurus.com. Please like or subscribe if you want to keep seeing this type of content. It was a windy Tuesday night. The seas were rough and Fort Lauderdale's most famous stretch of beach was nearly empty when employees at the beachfront bar Elbow Room spotted the gleam of fiberglass in the darkness and realized nobody was on board. When the boat came to rest on the shore, its navigation lights were still on. Roused by a report called in to dispatch, Fort Lauderdale police officers headed to the spot, across the sand from Las Olas Boulevard. Upon approaching the boat on foot, they saw that its shifter was still in gear, the keys in the ignition, the twin outboard engines were not running. They found a white iPhone and a wallet on the center console, and flip-flops and a black t-shirt lying on the deck, exactly the things one might leave behind if going for a quick swim. The contents of the wallet belonged to a man named Guma Aguiar. A check of official records showed the boat was registered in his name. Police officers woke up the iPhone and the screen filled with a list of missed calls and panicked text messages from Aguiar's wife, Jamie. She said she hasn't heard from him. She had pleaded with him to answer. One of the police officers reached the Coast Guard officer by phone and asked him to initiate a search and rescue operation. He relayed some information from the boat's GPS history, a fast trajectory from Aguiar's house about 2 miles northeast into the dark ocean, a quick turnaround, and then a long, slow drift back to shore. The police officer drove his patrol car over the intracoastal waterway and through the rich neighborhood of Rio Vista to the 6-bedroom house that Aguiar shared with his wife and 4 children. His wife, at 33 years old, told the officer that her husband's sudden disappearance that night was out of the ordinary, but she confessed their marriage was in trouble. Jamie and Aguiar had met in the 90s at Westminster Academy, a nearby Christian high school. After college, with direction from a wealthy uncle, he had traveled to Texas and made more money than he'd ever imagined. But a success story would be too simple for this man, who held himself to impossible standards. He embraced Orthodox Judaism seemingly overnight, just before he made his millions, and then spent a good deal of that money on the people and land of Jerusalem, becoming famous in Israel. Some people saw him as an erratic narcissist. Others viewed him as a devout philanthropist, even as dispute over his largesse became too big to ignore. Jamie told police they'd had a fraught conversation earlier that day, the latest in a series of fights. He kept asking if she was filing for divorce, and if not, why she was crying. She told him that she had not filed and that they would sit and talk when she got home. But when she arrived, he was already gone. The nanny said she had seen him leave in a hurry around 7:30 p.m. After kissing his children goodbye, his wife found his wedding ring in the house. In the first hours of the following morning, the Coast Guard began searching up and down the surrounding waterways. Police on ATVs fanned out across the beach. The search would continue for 3 days. If a body or an article of clothing had washed ashore, or if he were found delirious on a beach somewhere, the story would have petered out. Another eccentric millionaire gone overboard. But for months, the only signs of Aguiar would be what he left behind. Reporters from New York to Jerusalem combed through court records and yearbooks, trying to determine what drove him onto his boat that night. After a life of perfectionism, anger, and jet-setting philanthropy, the most amazing thing he ever did was disappear. Guma Leandro Aguiar was born in the shadow of Christ the Redeemer, the statue that stands over the hills of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. When he was an infant, his parents converted to the evangelical Christian practice, taking hold in traditionally Catholic Brazil in the mid-70s. His father was Otto de Souza Aguiar, a strikingly handsome Brazilian model and muralist. The family moved to America when Guma was 2 years old. Otto Aguiar continued to work scenes of Brazil into his paintings. A glimpse of curving shoreline through a gilded window or lush mountains behind a couple dining on a balcony. But his children grew up American. The family settled in Pompano Beach, and his Brazilian passport was Guma's strongest link to the country of his birth. Although his mother Ellen embraced Christianity, she was from a Jewish family from New York roots. Her younger brother, Thomas Kaplan, followed a lofty path, earning 3 degrees from Oxford University and then turning from history to economics and launching an investment career that would eventually bring him great riches. Young Guma earned money at the country clubs as a caddy and attempted perfection on the tennis court. After high school, Aguiar got into college on a tennis scholarship but dropped out of Clemson after a year. Kaplan, his uncle, then steered him toward a few opportunities not available to the average college dropout. Kaplan had become a successful New York commodities investor with an interest in several oil, gas, and mineral companies. He was also influential in the New York Jewish community. His success had been largely influenced by Judaism. According to a 2010 Bloomberg Businessweek profile, in 1988, Kaplan was completing his dissertation and earning extra money analyzing Israeli companies listed on US stock exchanges. The work involved traveling to Israel, and while there, Kaplan connected with 2 people who would shape the rest of his life. One was his future wife. The other was an Israeli investor who became close to Kaplan and later hired him as a junior trading partner back in New York. Just as Kaplan had been mentored, he in turn mentored his nephew Aguiar, giving him both a leg up and an education in Judaism. Like Kaplan, Aguiar studied history for a while at Oxford University. He went to work as a trader on Wall Street, near the investment firms run by his uncle. He began to work for his uncle in 2001, monitoring Kaplan's family's investments. By 2003, a former president of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists had begun researching possible oil and gas reserves in Texas. He ran into an old associate who wanted to introduce him to someone interested in investing in wildcat or unproven drilling ventures. The associate gestured to the corner where Aguiar was looking at some maps. Aguiar had come down to Houston as a representative for his uncle. Kaplan was convinced the world would face shortages of fossil fuels and wanted to tap the market by drilling for undiscovered reserves. So he sent Aguiar down as his eyes and ears, scouting opportunities. Soon, the uncle and nephew team were buying land in Robertson County, amassing around 30,000 acres through a new company named Leor Exploration. Kaplan owned it, Aguiar was its CEO, earning a salary. In 2005, Aguiar married Jamie. They already had one child, Jacob, born in January of that year. Although they had known each other since high school and had dated for 5 years, they still signed a prenuptial agreement which listed Jamie as having assets of $16,000 and Guma as having $3.5 million, mostly in cash, stock, and a Fort Lauderdale house. Later, when their marriage faltered, Jamie would accuse Guma of having hidden from her the fortune he was about to make from Leor. The prenup made no mention of the windfall that would follow. According to Jamie, 7 days after they signed the agreement, Kaplan made Aguiar a 10% partner. Aguiar, who just a few years earlier had been helping retirees with their tennis strokes, suddenly had wealth and power. In the fall of 2007, with the ventures raking in money, a Canadian company offered to buy out Kaplan and Aguiar. The price for all of Leor's holdings in the newly dubbed Amoruso field, $2.5 billion. 10% of that, $255 million, was enough to make Aguiar a very rich man. He started spending money on luxury items like cars and boats, and increasingly he turned his focus to Judaism. Aguiar got Jamie to convert. He began traveling to Israel frequently and buying properties in Jerusalem. A year later, Aguiar became famous when he offered to invest several $1 million in the popular but ailing Beitar Jerusalem soccer team. He followed up a few months later with an investment in the city's biggest basketball team. For Israelis, Aguiar's good looks and macho optimism were a welcome break from the backroom scandals of team ownership. Newspaper headlines refer to him simply as Guma. His rabbi said that women began to throw themselves at Aguiar. Jamie, his wife, would later allege that he had multiple mistresses. Friends knew him to smoke pot. Aguiar and Kaplan had cashed out and made their fortune in 2007. But by 2009, their relationship had dissolved and Kaplan filed 2 lawsuits against his nephew. Kaplan wanted damages and to strip Aguiar of all the money he had made as a partner. As Kaplan told in the lawsuit, Aguiar's adventure in Texas was little more than a research errand for Kaplan. Kaplan instructed Aguiar to identify potential oil and gas leaseholds, read the legal complaint. To accomplish this, Aguiar spoke with Kaplan on a daily basis, during which he received instructions, discussed prospects, was tutored on the process to be followed, and received approval for purchases. Moreover, Kaplan said Aguiar had frittered away the exploration venture's money. This included claims that Aguiar had used the money to obtain a personal bodyguard, to pay his friend for personal services, and to pay Jamie, his wife, $100,000 as a consulting fee. The most striking accusation mentioned in both suits, that Aguiar had come to believe he is the Messiah and has diverted funds in part to support his messianic vision. Aguiar hired a filmmaker, Jerry Levine, to follow him through Florida and Israel, making a series of documentaries about his life and work. Aguiar wanted to write his own story apart from the howling media. Levine said Aguiar told him that he was tired of being this guy making money for other people. Aguiar had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the filmmaker saw periods of dark depression. Unfortunately, I've seen him at his best and I've seen him at his worst too, Levine says. That same sort of aggressiveness and drive, that ambition focus could be turned to work against him. Now, all of a sudden, he was spending 20 hours a day doing stupid things. In June 2009, Aguiar was arrested for erratic driving and marijuana possession. Police officers later reported he acted violent in custody and told them he would take their jobs and families. At home, the marriage was fraying. In June 2011, Jamie had Aguiar arrested for domestic violence while she was pregnant with their fourth child. Jamie said he threatened to take their kids to Israel, seize contact with her, and put a bullet in her father's head. She claimed he had multiple mistresses and had given one of them her clothes. Then Guma filed for divorce, giving no official explanation other than that the marriage was irretrievably broken, a standard legal term. The divorce petition said assets should be divided according to the prenuptial agreement, the one that was written before Aguiar came into his drilling windfall. Guma eventually backed down, and the divorce did not go through. Last spring, Jamie, who had lawyered up on her own, fired back with a lawsuit saying Aguiar had admitted to concealing his expected wealth when drafting the prenup. In court papers, she cited his manic depressive, sometimes violent, mental history. Footage from a security camera at Aguiar's home on the day of his disappearance shows him pacing back and forth on the outdoor walkways, barefoot, wearing a gray-green t-shirt and black shorts, around 6:30 p.m. He holds his phone to his ear for an instant and then looks around. Later, another camera catches his boat, the TT Zion, leaving its berth in the canal. Boat captain, who had been performing a burial at sea during the rough weather, told police that he saw the TT Zion moving at high speeds, wave jumping over the swells as it headed into open water. The GPS log shows a quick, straight course northeast, then a tight diagonal loop. The boat turned abruptly and stopped moving. This is where it began drifting back to shore. Later, police found that the tie bar connecting the two engines had snapped, which they say might have caused the boat to move erratically. Levine, the filmmaker who was helping Aguiar write his story, says aloud that some people still cannot. The Aguiar fell off the boat accidentally and drowned. I think he had a really bad day and made some bad decisions, to take the boat out when the weather was bad and not to wear a life vest. But for some reason, that story isn't enough for the public and those who knew Aguiar. It seems too mundane, too accidental for a man who moved as strongly as Aguiar. Maybe he was murdered, maybe he was kidnapped, maybe he committed suicide, maybe he was picked up by some mysterious accomplice. His body has not been found, and police continue to treat the case as an open person missing investigation. The recovered boat showed no sign of struggle, but there were indications of what might have happened on board. He had removed the keys and wallet from his pockets, but investigators would find one other thing on the boat, a Jewish tefillin, or collection of scrolls to be worn close to the body during morning prayer. These ancient letter-bound words of the Torah, which are never allowed to touch the ground, accompanied Guma as he sped away into the ocean. Heading toward the horizon under darkening skies, the lights of Fort Lauderdale receding in his wake. News reports since his disappearance have centered on the legal dispute over his remaining fortune, which had been claimed by his uncle, mother, and wife. Alan Aguiar moved to take control of his assets immediately after he was reported missing, and Jamie, his wife, fought back. Attorneys began to tie up the various credit cards and accounts through which Aguiar had diffused his money and enthusiasm in Jerusalem. The bulk of his money, Guma's fortune, is roughly $100 million, according to his mother, and it's currently under the control of two court-appointed conservators, big shot lawyer Tom Penzer and Fort Lauderdale Mayor Jack Seiler, who is also an attorney. Even the Sun Sentinel, which has diligently reviewed new developments in the court cases, has pondered the possibility that Aguiar escaped. If Aguiar disappeared on purpose, he may want to note that many have tried in Florida and most have failed, the paper wrote. Among the circumstantial evidence that Aguiar did not survive the night at sea, he didn't withdraw money from his bank accounts or credit cards, or have someone do so on his behalf, the lawyer said. There were two reported sightings of Aguiar, one at Miami International Airport and another at a Palm Beach hotel, but Fort Lauderdale police said those reports were inaccurate. Perhaps the most significant clue, sworn statements by his wife and mother that they had not seen or heard from him and were not aware of anyone else, might have had contact. This is the Waterfront Gurus, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments.